Ain't nothing but a good man feeling bad. You're really not no Oh, yeah. Talk about Hawaii, I didn't know it was no friend. I take me out a hula, hula, girl. Everybody does it in Hawaii. Do you He's got it in, he's got it man. But it's not red and the feet are red. He's got it, I don't care. Everybody does it in Hawaii. And I'm hard to please, but everybody does it in Hawaii.
All right, hello everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. My name is Megan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the event director here at the Booksmith. Tonight it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Burch, moderated by Peter Guralnick. Give him a little round of applause. I'd also like to thank the Folk Americana Roots Hall of Fame for co-sponsoring this event. We are here tonight to celebrate the release of Paul's book, Meridian Rising. If you'd like to purchase a copy or to pick up a copy of Peter's latest book, you can do so at the register at the back of the event space. It's incredible to get to introduce Peter Guralnick, our moderator for the evening. Peter has been called a national resource by critic Nat Hentoff for work that has argued passionately and persuasively for the vitality of this country's intertwined black and white musical traditions. His books include the prize-winning 2-volume biography of Elvis Presley, Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love, Sweet Soul Music, Dream Boogie, The Triumph of Sam Cooke, and Sam Phillips, the man who invented rock and roll. His most recent book is Looking to Get Lost, or one of his recent books was Looking to Get Lost, Adventures in Music and Writing. And he has just published The Colonel and the King, Tom Parker, Elvis Presley, and the Partnership That Rocked the World. He wrote scripts for the Grammy-winning documentary Sam Cooke Legend and Martin Scorsese's blues documentary Feel Like Going Home. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our author this evening, Paul Burch. Paul is a native of Washington, D.C., is a writer, composer, and recording artist. Burch has produced numerous albums with his band, the WPA Ball Club, including Last of My Kind, a companion to Tony Early's best-selling novel, Jim the Boy, as well as a musical version of Meridian Rising. In addition, Burch has produced recordings with Mark Knopfler, Ralph Stanley, Lamb Chop, and Charlie Louvin, which received a Grammy nomination. Jimmie Rodgers' impact on American music is incalculable. Paul Burch's biofictional tale of the short and poignant life of the father of country music includes an imagined first-person memoir accompanied by the spirited, hilarious, and often conflicting recollections of Jimmie's family and music colleagues, along with period black and white illustrations. Born in 1897 in Meridian, Mississippi, Rodgers remains the only artist voted into the Rock and Roll, Country, Blues, and Songwriters Halls of Fame. Generations of fans from B.B. King and Johnny Cash to George Harrison and Dolly Parton recall a Rodgers record as the first music played in their home. But his fame extended far beyond America, and his disciples include Robert Johnson, Bob Dylan, John Prine, The Clash's Joe Strummer, Jack White, and anyone over the last century who's picked up a guitar to sing about life and the world around it. Meridian Rising is at once an immersive tale and a brilliant literary puzzle, deftly blending history and fiction to create a vibrant alternative life tale to the entertainer, Howling Wolf, called My Man That I Really Dug. Written with the knowledge, sensitivity of a touring musician who has traveled many of the same roads and stages, Meridian Rising engages the reader in a quest for truth while confronting the deceptions that live within our deepest relationships. And now, without any further ado, I will hand the stage over to Paul Burch and Peter Guralnick.
Is that it? Did I do it?
You're on, Pete.
You know, but she didn't mention my greatest qualification for being here to introduce my friend, Paul Burch, is that I worked at the Booksmith for 6 or 7 years back, before time began. So, and at just about every Booksmith there was, including the warehouse. So anyway, so it's good to be back, but it's even better to be back to introduce Paul. And I'm not going to ask too many questions because I told him he was going to have to be as loquacious as I am in answering questions. But also I want to leave you room, those of you who are his readers or his potential readers, give you a chance to ask the questions. But this is a truly wonderful book. The first question I have is, it is such a lively, sprightly, utterly charming, magical book. I've got to ask the most obvious question without really acknowledging how jealous I am of the book that Paul wrote. Where did the idea come from? And, and when I say the idea is to animate a well-known story, the story of a well-known figure, a very well-known figure, within a playful, fictional, but entirely grounded structure. To imagine the real man from his music, and from Paul's fascination with him, I'm sure. But from what? Where did it come from?
I have dreaded this question. Is loquacious, is that the right word? I'm going to try to.
Not just
Not just flirtation. It very indirectly, much like songwriting is for me. But as far as where the fascination from Jimmy came, at first, writing music from his point of view was I saw that as a great adventure as a songwriter, because I love to write. But I'm also so fond of the sort of narrow structure of songs, which tend to be a title, verses that support the title, and a bridge, and you're out, after 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And I'm a student, say, I love the writing of Don Covey and Mort Schumann, and of course I love Bob Dylan, but I love Hank Williams and Chuck Berry. And I think when I heard a duet that Jimmy did with a blues guitar player named Clifford Gibson, who was quite great for his time, clearly a student of the great players of the time. And Jimmy made this record or recording that was unreleased in his lifetime, but it reminded me a little bit of the way Robert Johnson plays, Clifford Gibson's style. And I just thought that was fascinating to hear Jimmy's voice with what was a modern blues guitar player at the time. And being fascinated with that sound and sort of wondering who Jimmy was dovetailed with me wanting to go on an adventure and write songs that weren't outside of the structure of everything that I loved, mostly so I wouldn't get tired of it. That is what inspired the music. But after I was done with that record, as things happen when you write about someone that people really care about, all these kinds of interesting facts about Jimmy started heading my way, including a transcript of an interview with Howlin' Wolf that I think was not fully transcribed in Wolf's lifetime, where Wolf said that he was friends with Jimmy and that they knew each other maybe in the hill country in Mississippi. And that got me thinking that maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to try to write about it in some way, maybe a short story. And I really dreaded trying to write a book. Many friends had suggested, maybe even you could have suggested, that I try to write something either fictional or historical about him. And I just knew that would, to put yourself in the position of having to write every day in a world of writing that I knew nothing about. I was really intimidated. But then, I'll tell you what happened, Pete. I had a vision. I saw the beginning of the book and the end of the book. I had this vision of Jimmy under a tree, typing a letter on a portable typewriter, about to board a ship to New York for his final recording session. He died the day after his final recording session in New York, which is true. And I had him I just saw him writing a letter to his daughter that he would never see again. And then I had a vision of, and popped in my imagination of an older woman and a younger girl waiting at a Coast Guard ship off Coney Island. And I thought, well, hell, I seem to have the beginning of a book and I seem to have the end of a book. And the only model I had was a book I loved as a kid called I Am the Cheese by Robert Cormier. I think that's which was alternating chapters of kind of a monologue, and then transcriptions of I think a conversation with a psychiatrist or some an invisible force of some kind, and the two stories eventually merge. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I thought there was something I was always struck by that book as a kid, how inventive it was, and how when you finally got to the end to find out how this story was going to come across, there were a lot of kind of frightening moments. And I just thought it was an era of great young adult books, S.E. Hinton, The Outsiders, and things like that. So that was kind of in my, I would love to write something short that seemed exciting about this person who was kind of the town square for all my favorite musicians, so they can all meet in their respect, if not love, for Jimmy Rogers. How's that? Did that go on long enough?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, I'm done. But I'm going to jump. You screwed up the order of my. I've got such a logical order. But you have such a range of voices, such a range of characters, including Ralph Peer, including Mrs. Jimmy Rogers. What's her name?
Carrie.
Carrie, yeah, including, was it her sister or sister-in-law, Elsie McWilliams, who wrote
Yes, Jimmy had a sister-in-law, the wife of the sister of his wife, Carrie, who he wrote quite a lot of songs with.
But, so the question I have for you, including Charlie Patton, including Sam Chaplin, the question I have for you is, did they all come to you in a dream too? All these voices, because they are so distinct. And,
Thank you.
For instance, when Carrie Rogers at the beginning is being interviewed by someone we don't know who's, she presents a certain range of facts. She expresses herself in a certain way. The interviewers kind of seems a little uptight or something. And everything changes from, including sometimes the typeface. So was that all, did that all come from the same dream?
It did come from the same dream, but I think it was the book ended up being a way of kind of doing two things. One, finding a place for all of these facts that I found really interesting about Jimmy to go, because I had run out of room to write about them in song. But first of all, the Country Music Hall of Fame has such a great collection of letters from Jimmy, as well as letters to his old fan club of people who knew him. And it could, something as small as the restaurant that he ate at in Manhattan called the Lobster, which was there for decades and decades. That's where he had his last meal. The fact that he seemed to just collect cars. They had lots and lots and lots of Cadillacs. He had custom cars. He had a car called Thirsty the Christmas Tree that was painted red with a green top that had secret compartments for bottles, pistols, and things like that. And he seemed to, even though he was a balding, tubercular, skinny guy, he also seemed to have all kinds of escapades with just friends and women, and he seemed to be the life of the party wherever.
Well, he was a dying guy. Besides, he had, from the moment that he enters the picture, he's dying of tuberculosis.
That's right.
So, it's kind of remarkable that he should have this life, be this life force, while so frail.
Yeah, and I think, and that might not be physically or medically possible if we were to peel things back. But even the Ken Burns documentary, which I was already way into my writing when that happened, but they spoke about him being a living adventure wherever he went. But I didn't have the vision of writing these folks, of what these folks would say, except maybe in some ways the interviews were turned out to be that I was getting them to say the things that I wish somebody had asked them. Because, you know, we're in an era, thanks to you and thanks to other writers I adore, of letting your subjects talk. I'm not changing the subject to you, I'm just mentioning that, I'm gonna keep it on me. But, you know, you know, the modern way is to let people talk and let people tell the story in their own voice. And many of the people who are in Meridian Rising, some of them were never interviewed or they were never given the chance to speak. But then about halfway through writing the book, it kind of became, I felt like it was also defending just sort of the art life, you know, because in the last few years, from my point of view, just the value of being, whether it's a writer or a musician or expressive person, has kind of been under attack. And in a way, it's at least thankfully there's still bookstores, but you know, in the world of music, it's become something that's, you know, the music business doesn't exist. And for all its problems, it still did give a platform. And it's kind of Jimmy created a lot of that, or set the standard for that music business. So since I don't tour very much, I sort of volunteered on behalf of all of my fellow musicians to give Jimmy a chance to speak about what, you know, the value of what it means to be a musician and a creative person.
Well, I just have to say to all of you, whether you've read the book or not, the thing that's so amazing about the book is that the voices just speak. And it's as if, I believe they came to Paul in a dream. I don't care what he says. But I mean, but this is like reading, you could read Roddy Doyle, you could read Joyce Carey with The Horse's Mouth or Herself Surprised, all these different characters who find their own voices. There are many writers like this. But in this one book, you have this extraordinary range of voices, all of whom seem to not come out of nowhere, but they demand to be heard. But all right, let's talk about one of them. Let's talk about H.C. Spear.
Okay.
This is someone who was relevant. How many people know H.C. Spear? You have anybody who knows H.C. Spear? Who he was? I know you're shy. I know most of you know him. You just don't want to. I would never raise my hand myself. But okay, so he's this guy. He is a little. I'm going to say he's little known since you confirmed that. And he's a seminal figure in the story of American vernacular music. An enormously important person from Jackson, Mississippi. And maybe, I was thinking that Paul could tell a little bit about the role that he played in unearthing. When I wrote this, I said, unearthing loose music, and what a great pun. But a little bit of the role that he played in this. But first, in connection with your research, I mean, how much of a role does imagination play in bringing someone like this to life? Now, you and I are both familiar with the only interview that I know of, you may know of others, by our friend Gail Dean Wardlow of H.C. Spear in old age, when he's an organic gardener, wearing Bermuda shorts.
Right.
But
and suspenders too.
Yeah.
Excellent suspenders.
But I mean, it's like you write about, well, I don't know if this is the only early photograph, it's the only early photograph of H.C. Spear that I've seen. He looks as if he's just done something in the middle of the day a gentleman of Jackson, Mississippi doesn't do. Now, that's a pretty good characterization. Is that who H.C. Spear is? Where did H.C. Spear come from in your, to you? How did he arrive on your doorstep?
I first heard about him.
That's him.
There he is. There he is. So very briefly, H.C. Spear ran a music store at Jackson, Mississippi, and he seemingly all his life had a love of black music. And he set up a recording studio in the back room of his music store. And at the time that he did this, in the late 1920s, you couldn't go out and buy, there wasn't really no radio equipment because radio was in its infancy. And I haven't been able to track down how he even got some kind of portable recording machine. But he did, and he ended up recording virtually, just an incredibly wide group of musicians, nearly all of them extremely impactful on modern music. But how I got...
Black and white both? Or
Black and white both, yes. From Uncle Dave Macon to Charlie Patton, Skip James, and a lot of those artists have been covered by rock folks. How I got to him, I think I was, at some point I was trying to determine, well, so in the original interview, which is a very frustrating interview, I'll say, about our friend, because he doesn't really he cuts off H.C. Spear quite a lot.
Now, he was a sports writer.
Yes.
You know, so, and they're a great
Right.
sport. I mean, in later times, sports writers are some of the greatest imaginative writers we could run into, but he is our friend, but he wasn't one of them.
Well, here's another case where I was a haphazard researcher, much like all songwriters. I was looking for something that was just of interest to me, and I thought he was how I got to him, I think there was a box set of all of Charlie Patton's music, and probably the first time I had heard it all in pretty good sound. And I was fascinated that this one person, purely on the love of the music, and also happened to be located in just the right place, had, just much like Jimmy, H.C. Spear was kind of a town square where everybody came to hear themselves as others hear them, right? Record their own voices and make records, and he just also seemed to have a good relationship with all the musicians. And in the process of reading about him, I found out that Jimmy had visited him and either had an audition with him or was seeking audition with him, and maybe it didn't.
Well, you definitely did. It says so in the book.
Yeah, it says so in the book. And again, maybe you have parallels in your own writing, but I just was so fascinated that a white musician from Mississippi would seek out not only a place to make a record, which was a brand new, kind of a brand new medium at the time, but also that he would align himself with a talent scout that was primarily recording black artists. And Jimmy's, I think his main love of music came from not only black music, but black theater at the time. Traveling vaudeville shows, which tended to be composed of a lot of, what I found out, I think I know anyway, as truth-telling songs, writing songs about what's really happening in your life, speaking to the audience in such a way where you say, I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me, and I bet it could have happened to you too. And that was very different than like white pop music, which was very much, from a kind of, literally from a raised platform. It wasn't a personal style of music, before the
It was like parlor music.
Yes, it was like parlor music, or like a modeling the song. It was really about the talent of the singer, where musicians fly low to the ground, and so the music that Jimmy liked and the music that we like was sung as if the listener was right next to you. So I think that's the idea of him seeking a chance. There's parallels to Elvis, but I was mostly just thinking that even though Jimmy was sick and he was dying, he had this idea that he wanted to make records, and with that, you also have to think he must have realized that he was going to reach more people with one record than he ever would have traveling the country. And not all musicians thought that way, but the more I found out about Jimmy, the more he seemed somewhat progressive for the time. And so it was easy to, and he also, one thing about that was really inspiration to me is that in Jimmy's letters, he would turn a phrase like a lot of creative people do. Like if he was driving when he wanted to go out driving, he'd say he was going to go Cadillacing. And when he had a recording date, he'd say he was sessioning. And if he
kind of like Chuck Berry.
Right. If he had an encore, he said he was ovationing. So he just was a creative guy, and just with those little pieces, he became more and more interesting to me. It's like, well, I kind of know what it's like I don't know what it's like to influence people, but I know what it's like to be a traveling musician. I know what it's like to, the wonderful, really small flashes of friendships that you get, and the strange things that you see in life, and it wasn't a methodical thing, but once I dedicated myself to throwing myself into this, and I have to say you were a huge happy influence, because I read an interview with you. This is for all writers out there. That one of the inspirations for you, and you correct me, I know you will if necessary, that you read in the Paris Review interview with Ernest Hemingway, who said he got up at such and such an hour and wrote so much for such a days, and that gave you a template of how to approach writing. And songwriting is more just sort of walking down the street and you hear something, sort of this kind of thing. But I knew that if I was going to attempt this, or whether it was going to be a short story or whatever it might be, it was going to be so different than songwriting. So I would go out and try to write like 20 pages, or 2 or 3 hours, however long it's going to take. I wasn't going to worry about copy editing or even reading it. I was just going to try to force myself to write. And so going down these avenues of imagining H.C. Spear's store and what he sold there, and what his attitude with the musicians were, I had some help because there was enough in his original interview for me to get an idea that he really enjoyed this was a happy place for him. And in a way, I think he was reticent, is that the right word, to talk about it because he missed it. And our friend was not doing a very good job of interviewing him. He was kind of cutting him off a lot. And so I thought, well, if he could have a chance to really go back there and enjoy it again, how would he talk about his experience and the way he treated the musicians? And so in a sense, he could become someone that Jimmy could emulate. Like, he took the artist seriously, and so Jimmy could take himself seriously.
Okay, but I have to take exception to what Paul said, because he's not about Hemingway, that's true, but about the reason that Paris Review interview. But no, I mean, Paul talks about little pieces. There are no little pieces in this book. The point is, and that's why I'm saying it had to come to him in a dream. It could have been the devil's dream. We don't know what dream it was. But the point is that what's extraordinary about the book is the extent to which all of these people come to life, not out of the little pieces of research, but out of the extension, the inspiration that those little pieces give to animate them. And they come to full life, including Jimmy Rogers. And their voices are very distinct, and they all have their own way. And I don't know if they're like the real people. See, I thought Paul would tell us they are the real people. I know they're the real people. But, they are real people. Whether they are the real people, who knows? But and H.C. Spear is fascinating not because there are these little things, because he's an organic gardener in the 60s in Mississippi, but just because he comes alive in that way. I'm going to ask one more question. I have other questions to ask, but Paul's got something to read, which probably will give you a sense of it, and then you may have some questions, and if you don't, then I can go back to my plotting style. But
I'm sorry I got you out of order.
oh man, I'm really messed up here. but the thing is, okay, so you're talking about H.C. Spear. You're talking about his music store on
Ferris Street, which was a business district.
About which comes into several blues songs.
Yes.
The street. But okay, the question of race. Now, the interesting thing about Jimmy. And I'm sorry, I don't know, was there a tape or, Spotify playing when you walked in?
Yeah, there was.
Oh, good. Well, the weird thing about Jimmy is, it's like Paul said, he's in every Hall of Fame. But I mean, basically, he's got all these blue yodels, he wrote all these blues. He also has all these totally sentimental songs, which might just fit into that white tradition that you're talking about, and yet he brings so much to it. But with respect to the question of race, in Jimmy's world, in the book, and race appears to be a very fluid thing. In fact, it looks that way in H.C. Spear's world, both in terms of H.C. Spear's business and seemingly his views, his social views. Now, could you talk a little about this? I mean, is this something that you have projected, or is this something that comes from your research that, that the world, as terrible, place as it was and is in so many ways, that there was room in that world for a place in which the whole racial identity thing was fluid, and in which Jimmy could move in and out, and also the musicians from Louis Armstrong to Clifford Gibson could move in and out of the world that they created for themselves.
It's a projection, but only because I think that's what the evidence tells us. I mean, when someone like George Harrison and Sam Phillips and B.B. King and to a degree. Howlin' Wolf say that Jimmy was one of the first records in their home, and you think, you know, first of all, a record player, any kind of medium or media player is a luxury. So if you think the one luxury item you're going to have is music in your home, maybe that's the only luxury item you can have, and maybe there's no paintings, there's not many books, you know, other than the Bible, and one of the handful of records in that collection is this one singer.
This is on a wind-up phonograph.
Right, a wind-up phonograph. And but to answer your question, you know, that says something to me. But I think my experience as a musician, say, as I said, I think earlier, musicians fly low to the ground. They deal with people as they really are. They meet a man or woman as they appear. And it's not that prejudice isn't involved in their lives, but you know, it's a rough world to be a musician, you know, and you have to, your sense of people, your sense of time and place, your empathy, your ability to sort of see things that haven't happened yet, also tuning your ears to really listen to the tone of someone's voice. I mean, that's this I know, so the projection part is my experience as a musician, you know. You can kind of walk into a venue and you know if the person you're dealing with is going to treat you well, or whether they're maybe going to run out the door with the pay that's supposed to be in your pocket at the end of the night. You just get this sixth sense. If you're traveling and that's the way you make a living, you get an idea sometimes just from walking in the room whether the venue is a really safe, wonderful place, or whether it's a place that you feel could be a place of trouble, you know. And so my way of sort of thinking thinks, okay, if all these different musicians are sensing that Jimmy is kind of a homing device, someone that, or a place that they feel like they'd be at home with. I called it a town square where all these musicians can meet. Their idea, Jimmy was so many of these people's idea of an ideal entertainer, someone that could appeal to everyone. And we still have that, you know, you've written about Elvis. You know, there's lots of fans of, say, Elvis or Roy Orbison that say, well, why did they do more pop music, or why did they do stuff with strings? Because they wanted to appeal to everybody, and they weren't looking. You know, their ideal of an aesthetic was very different than necessarily the listeners. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, like Louis Armstrong or Sam Cooke or lots of others. I want to move into this world. I mean, I love the world that you've created. And again, it's just like with H.C. Spear. I don't know if this is what it was like.
Right. I hope it's what it was like.
But I love that it exists, at least in this book. Well, I want to hear you. I want to hear you read it. And let's.
Okay. This will be short, ladies and gentlemen. So this takes place at the very beginning of the book, and the only thing that you've missed by not hearing this is that Jimmy is in Texas, where he moved. He was born in Mississippi, but he's writing this from Texas, and he is about to he's about to make one final trip to New York, where he's going to do a series of recording sessions, which are going to put a little bit of money in his pocket, really in his family's pocket. So this is Jimmy's voice. The way I see it, everybody's allowed one big break in life, one big idea. Sadly, most folks never know they got one coming. And even if they catch a good one, they usually let it go, just to see if it might come back. Here's why. Your average parent gnaws at their kids to be just like them, work a sorry job, live in the same sorry town, and marry someone like mother and daddy, one litter to the next, miserable. So when your big break flies at you fast in that comet of time just before you fall asleep, or in that early morning minute when your eyes open and your head's clear and you catch your first good breath, that big idea meant for you has about as much chance of blooming as a rose in the rail yard. I still think about mine anytime I'm traveling, which I've been doing since I was near 10. I stop about a mile outside wherever I'm headed, find a place just like this, close my eyes and call that feeling, see if it still remembers me. Out in this country, you don't have to go far for the horizon to open up all around you. The mountains will haze out of the heat, and in no time you're adrift in a sea of red dirt and little islands of blackfoot daisies, blue bonnets, and red cedar. You can see your future coming at you, kicking up dust miles away. And even though you know it's coming, you can't help watching it pull closer and closer till it's on you. Out here, I like to think the great turner of the earth can find me. And when I pull over and get out my smoke bag and roller stick, He'll say, well, Dad burned my hide. If Jimmy Rogers is going to take a rest, then so will I. Then he'll put his hands on that giant gearbox, shift the world into neutrality, and step out of his engine room and into the same sun I'm staring into now. He'll wipe his neck, take a clean breath, and together, him on his plane and me on mine, we'll listen to the peaceful sound of Mother Earth as she drifts through space. The only other place that beats this country is Coney Island early in the morning. You can get a Boylan's and a Nathan as early as you like, and the windy ocean will whisper in your ear until you're ready to walk straight out into her arms, never to return. I dreamed one night I was alone on the boardwalk. I went to get a ticket for the picture show, but I had to get a ticket from one of those fortune-telling machines. When I took my seat, everybody was made out of painted cardboard. And when the picture started, right up there on the screen was my grandma and grandpops leaving Ireland for America. Then the frame burned out, and there was my mama washing dishes in some cafe, except she was young and happy. Just then, my daddy appeared in the doorway, eating an apple. I stood and hollered at the screen, "Don't do it, Mother, run!" But then the cardboard people picked me up out of my seat and threw me out onto the boardwalk. That's when I knew I needed a nurse.
It becomes a key figure in the book. I love that shift. What is it?
Shift the world into neutrality.
Into neutrality, yeah. You take the gearbox and you shift the world. Yeah. Another. There's just so much great language in
Thank
it.
you.
But okay, so for those of you who have read the book, for those of you who are planning to read the book, for those of you who are interested in Jimmy Rogers or Paul Burch or just the world that he just described, any questions? I was thinking we were hearing a question, but it was just a voice.
So I'm especially interested in the sort of spectrum of work that you've done around this, songwriting and novel writing, and with these different kinds of writing mediums. And I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more about where you see songwriting and prose writing coming together, where they diverge, what pleasures the prose writing brought you, where you saw frustration or restrictions.
Sure. Where they come together, they're so different. The nice thing, what was hard for me to make the transition, and I feared trying to make the transition, is that when I write a song, I can't wait to play it for someone. I can't wait to play it for the musicians that I regularly play with. I have a group that I've played with for a long time. And the great thing about being a musician is you can get together with your friends and play music, and you can sound terrible, and know that you sound terrible. You can sing out of tune, you can be sloppy, but you can, at the end of that afternoon, you can go, that was really fun. You know, and it's really about being together, like the socialness of being used to one another. And in recording, you can record all day in the studio and do nothing that you'd ever want to release. But you're likely to go, well, that's not the direction, or I'll get a different group of musicians. Like I approach recording as if you can't go wrong. You're going to get something out of it. And also, songs are short. In a novel, you can't bebop-a-loo-la your way or hum out of something. You know, you can't get out of that corner. And also, songs are so short by nature too that if I get inspired to write something, or if a song comes, words and music, I'm eternally thankful for that. But it's also rather like if this was a party and all of a sudden I got an idea for a song, I could go out and write down or record on my phone what little I had, and I could remember what I was thinking of at a later time and finish it. You know, there's no place you can't sort of sneak out and grab that inspiration. But writing, as Pete said, as Ernest Hemingway said, no comparison, Pete, is you do have to sit down for a long time and sometimes write nothing. For me, I wrote a lot of stuff that just wasn't going anywhere. And then I thought, okay, I'm on page 19. I said I'm going to write 20 pages, double space. And then in that last half hour, all of a sudden, something will come that I didn't expect that actually makes me feel like I'm on the right track. There's something that happens at the end of this book, a revelation about a relationship that actually came on the very last day that I was putting the book together as best I could to start sending it to people. And I was shocked when it happened because I didn't know it was coming, and it actually, I could look back on the whole book, I don't think I told you this, and go, wow, that really works. But I don't know where it came from. So writing novel is sort of like honeysuckle. It's just like trying to make a whole cake out of that drop. And the aloneness of it was really hard. That's the best way. Like songs, like even if I'm writing by myself, it's eventually community, giving it to people. And lastly, no one wants to read your novel when it's not done. Whereas if you make a recording and make a rough mix of it or something, you can play it behind, you're having people over for dinner. You can sneak it in at the end of the dinner after everyone's had 3 glasses of wine. And they go, oh, is this your new record? Oh, it's something I'm working on. Oh, sounds good. And just having that, no one gets up to leave or throws food at you, and someone just says, well, this sounds good. This sounds different. And then I can enjoy their viewpoint of it. But no one really wants to read your book until it's in this form, and you're speaking with someone like Peter, and then it becomes an event, or something good that you've done. But so it's really hard. You have to and maybe that's why, to answer your question, Pete, why the world is so populated. Because I thought, if I'm only going to do this once, I want to make it as lively as possible. I'm going to have to throw everything I can into it, because I didn't know, even though I thought I had a beginning and an ending, I still had so many surprises along the way. I didn't know what was being delivered and what I was conjuring. It was a very strange endeavor.
You see, you answered, Paul answered the last question I was going to ask him, which is, did you know this was going to be a mystery from the start? I was going to ask what the mystery was. I wasn't asking you, but you see, you didn't know. You didn't know until the end. So I think that just shows how slow I am. But I want to say one thing about what Paul just said, and then we need another question. But this whole thing about, the last book that I wrote was about looking to get lost, and it's just basically what Paul was talking about. You look for that moment that you get lost. You can't live in the lost because you can't find the lost. There's no map to it. But maybe you're there for 3 hours and you get 10 minutes where you're lost. And just one thing, about making music by community. I think probably one of the greatest concerts, or whatever you want to call it, I ever saw was Merle Haggard doing a sound check in Reno, where he had the band, the Bob Wills band with him. He called the sound check. He hated playing Reno. He hated playing Las Vegas because they're short sets. They must have gone on for 3 or 4 hours, just playing everything they knew, and it was just the most lost moment. It was just a wonderful lostness. So but okay, we what good are my questions if Paul answers them before I ask them? So, I'll bet if one of you asks a question, he will have already answered. Any questions?
Yes, I finished the book last night. I was really thoroughly into it.
Thank you.
And I was listening to a lot of Jimmy this week in preparation for coming tonight. And you mentioned a lot of musicians in the book, other people. Listening to some of those tracks, it seemed to me, you mentioned Mississippi Sheiks. Did you record with them? Some of these tracks I'm hearing, it sounds really like they are with them.
That's a great question. You asked about a group called the Mississippi Sheiks, which was a very popular band who had one particular song that's entered the American vernacular, Sitting on Top of the World, if that's the right word. I don't think he ever recorded with them. The idea to put them in his world came from someone had written about Jimmy and mentioned that Sam Chapman, who was a member of the Chapman family, who were part of the Mississippi Sheiks, had backed up Jimmy at a dance that had been part of it. But I couldn't find, nor could the writer, find out where they got this tidbit. But I just was sort of fascinated that it seemed like they would have been friends. But I did, and the one thing that was wonderful about this project is I had all kinds of surprises where, talk about answering a question before it's asked, where I would write something that I thought was fiction, and then I would find out that something like what I had written had actually happened. And after I had already started thinking that, okay, I'm going to pretend that this fact is right, that I read that Sam and Jimmy were friends, and I got lost and created a world where they had a friendship. I've discovered a song by the Mississippi Sheiks called Yodeling Fiddling Blues, which is about a singer who makes his living yodeling the blues and needs to get out of Mississippi and move to Texas. And this record came out exactly when Jimmy was leaving Mississippi and moving to Texas. And I thought, well, that's a funny coincidence. And so I don't, something may be revealed, a memoir or something that actually puts them together. But that one song is which the Mississippi Sheiks, where they yodel and everything. It sounds like, it's constructed like a Jimmy Rogers song, but it seems to be it alludes to some kind of shenanigans of why this guy has got to get out of Mississippi and move to Texas.
Well, I mean, yodeling was such a huge thing, not just in country music, but all through music of every kind, through, you know, blues music, hillbilly music, through Swiss yodels, through, you had yodeling Betty Cody in Maine, who was a big star, incredible yodeler, still going a few years ago. But she's actually Lenny Breaux's mother, and Lenny Breaux's brother, Denny, is still playing all over Maine. So, but okay, here's a very important question that I know you've all been waiting for. Where did Jimmy Rogers' yodel come from? This is his most distinctive vocal characteristic, and Paul may recreate it in a moment. but okay, so in the book I read, and I believe everything I read in the book, that maybe it came from the Marx Brothers' mother, Minnie. Now, is that true? Or wait a minute, you know, you already brought up Chester Arthur Burnett, better known as the Howlin' Wolf. And so where did Howlin' Wolf's howl fit into the yodeling picture? And that's, you know, we could go on forever.
We could.
But just
All right,
those two.
It's two questions. One, I don't know where Jimmy got his yodel. I haven't heard, I'm not an expert, but I'm a huge fan of music from that time, and I've not heard anyone yodel like Jimmy does prior to his most famous record called Tea for Texas. But that's a good example if you like to write how things can get into your head. I was just watching all the Marx Brothers movies, which I watched when I was a kid, and during this process I just got into watching the 4 or 5 that everybody loves, which were based on their stage shows. And naturally I started watching some interviews with Groucho and reading some books about them. And they used to tour with their mother, and they toured throughout Alabama and Mississippi and all through the South. And Minnie, their mom, had a spot in the show where she sang and yodeled. And it seems like, I found out that they went through somewhere in Alabama where Jimmy's dad lived, or where he definitely had visited. And so I thought, well, since I don't know where the yodel come from, wouldn't it be great if he went to see the Marx Brothers and you know, walked home yodeling. But for Howlin' Wolf's, it turns out that from Howlin' Wolf interview, that he used to just, that Howlin' Wolf was working on a farm or plantation, and which they still called them plantations, and Jimmy would come and sing. And he would, in Wolf's words, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he would sit at Jimmy's, just as you are, sometimes sit and listen to him. And Jimmy said, you know, are you a singer? Do you want to be a singer? Do you want to learn to yodel? And they would go out into the field, and Jimmy would sort of, you know, I'd imagine he would sort of slow down the yodel and show how he would break in his voice. But Chester Burnett, Howlin' Wolf, was already a very big person, and just where his voice is pitched, it was easier for him to do woo. Well, it's easier for me to do Howlin' Wolf's than Jimmy's. But that his howl was inspired by enjoying Jimmy's yodel. So that's a true part. But Minnie, well, I'd love to find out that Minnie Marx was actually there.
I believe it. I believe it, and I think all of you should go home and tell everybody you know, your family, your friends, that Minnie Marx was the inspiration for the blue yodel. But I want to say one thing to support what Paul said. Not that he needs my support, but with the Howlin' Wolf thing about finding, Howlin' Wolf always said that Jimmy Rogers was his primary influence in terms of his howl, which is a variation of the yodel. And, you know, I mean, not that I knew Howlin' Wolf, I would have liked to have known him really well, but I knew him a little. And he said it to me, he said it to lots of people, and I was going, yeah, sure. You know, we all know that your howl comes from the Mississippi Sheiks, who were yodeling, or from Tommy Johnson, one of the great blues singers from that area at that time, who broke his voice like that. Then, as Paul says, all of a sudden, and this is the only good thing I can say about the internet, all of a sudden this interview with Howlin' Wolf by Chris Strackley shows up on the internet, where he tells his whole story about not only did his yodel his howl come from Jimmy Rogers, but he was working on this plantation in the hill country. A rich guy owned it. Jimmy Rogers would come visit the plantation. He heard him out on the porch, and that's where his yodel came from. So that's a good example of how one can imagine lots of things, and then reality, bears them out. But I think we have time for maybe one more question. I know we have a lot of Jimmy Rogers fans out there. I'll tell you one other thing was just, you mentioned about nobody ever did the yodel like Jimmy Rogers. Until Jimmy Rogers. Down in Meridian, there was a guy who lost his sight in World War II. He could sing every Jimmy Rogers song and reproduce every single yodel in exactly the right place. And Merle Haggard thought this was the greatest artist he had ever met. Whereas Merle Haggard, one of the greatest song interpreters of all time, sang all of Jimmy's songs, but not quite in that light. But he was fascinated by that guy. And the guy was terrific. But
You said that you don't tour very often, and writing music is very different than writing a novel. How does the book tour compare to the music tour?
Well, it's fun, it's fun. I can be a little bit lighter on my feet because I don't have to anticipate. Although it sounds like I've anticipated a lot of Pete's questions and answered them before he asked them. I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm a little nervous because I know I wrote the book and I'm happy with it, and I'm very, very thankful that you're here. It still seems very strange because I didn't set out to be an author. In a way, I'm a songwriter who, I love songwriting so much that this became kind of an extension of it, of songwriting, in a way, so I could go back to writing songs and have that be fresh. It's wonderful to write rock and roll or any kind of song, but if you do it long enough, there's always the danger, as our friend Nick Lowe says, what was once a groove is, what is now a rut was once a groove, and I've been perhaps overly conscious of not wanting to wear out the thing that I love the most, and narrative songwriting and narrative writing really feels like flying, because you can, it's something about my personality where if I discover something about someone and I feel like it was really important to them and they're of interest to me anyway, and I can just jump into that world and really kind of get lost in it and enjoy writing about it. And I think anybody who wants to write, talking even for myself, if I were to dare to ever try to do this again, is to write something that you can get lost in. And that's kind of what great rehearsals are about, like watching Merle Haggard play for 3 hours and to be, because that was Merle Haggard's dream. He loved Bob Wills and Sex's Playboys. To be able to be in a position to hire them, to be on a professional stage with good sound, that's my thought as a musician. It's like, well, let's just play what we love, since what we're being paid for is not really what we want to do. And so those are the things that musicians really love. And also, just the occurrence of running into a situation where you meet an old friend, or you get an environment where you can really be yourself. So those are the things that any creative person lives for. Whether you're a painter or a teacher. If you're approached by a kid if you're a teacher and you're approached by a student who is interested in the very things that you are, and you recognize yourself in them, you can get lost together. And there's so few moments in life when you can do that, but it lights your whole life up. Lights up your whole intellect. And this, even though this is about history, it didn't feel old when I was writing it, because these people, I know some version of these people, and I know someone who's like Carrie, and I know someone who's like H.C. Spear, and there's no one quite like Jimmy, but I have known lots of people who, on one hand, who are kind of wild and inspired and spontaneous, but also have a very strong moral center of how the world should work and how it does work, and negotiating a bridge to make it work for you in situations where it shouldn't. And Jimmy really has to do that as a traveling musician. You don't have to be a violent person, but if you're in an area where you might need a gun, you're gonna carry it, right? So he had pockets for pistols and pockets for this, and he aligned himself with, he was an honorary Texas Ranger, and I think all of that stuff was mostly to insulate himself in case he got in trouble, but also because he wanted to be a person of respect. He grew up, so I sensed from his letters and other things that have been written about him that he grew up as someone who felt like he was on the margin of society, not even on the margin, like off the page. And so when he wanted to be an entertainer and a musician, and he realized that other people who were on the margins, white or black, who were entertainers, were really in control of their environment when they were performing, that was exciting to him, because he realized if I do that, I can become a person of respect. I can become a person of renown, and I can have some money in my pocket. So it wasn't so much as being flashy, having a custom suit and a custom guitar and a custom Cadillac. It was like, I am a somebody, I am a person. And, at that time, and in now, sometimes you have to reiterate that in a really big way. You have to keep a big head to stay afloat. And I think that sense of reality, and the danger that comes with it is, that's something really easy for me to talk about, but it's necessary. It's by necessary or necessity. It's hard to sing about sometimes. So I like both. I'm sure when I go back to just singing, I'll start missing some of the. I'll start romanticizing the long hours of seemingly going nowhere. But wherever you can get lost is all right.
Well, I think we have another question? Last question.
Heartfelt congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Any truth to the rumor that you'll be at the Medford Condon Shell tomorrow?
Yes, I will be. I will be at the Bedford Condon Shell, and I'll actually
River celebration, or Medford River celebration.
I will be performing. I'll be performing with my great friends and old friends, the Bag Boys. I lived here in Boston. I lived in Somerville and Cambridge. Did they call Somerville East Cambridge in Love Story? I can't remember. Whatever it was. I lived here for 4 years. I used to play every week with the Bag Boys at the Plow and Stars in Cambridge. So I'm actually going to be here another day to play some music. So thank you. That's an excellent question.
And it was so
Party
random,
bag.
too.
So random, so out of the blue, so round, so firm.
But I want to thank Paul. I want to reassure you that if he says this is a work of, it seems historical, maybe so. It takes place in the past, but it takes place in this very moment. I mean, it's so alive. It's such a wonderful book, and you also owe it to yourself. I don't know, Paul, if Paul has CDs for sale here, but if not, you should seek out the music, and then you can answer the question Paul just answered about the difference between writing fiction and the music. But the music is wonderful too. So anyway, so I just want to thank Paul for giving us such a great evening.
Well, thank you, Pete. Thank you.
Thank you both so much.